Hi, I'm James Brundage from Start Automating, and today I'm going to walk through a kind of complex control in ShowUI. ShowUI is a quick little project that allows you to write UI in PowerShell, specifically WPF UI in PowerShell, and you can get it at showui.codeplex.com. Over here I've got a script that I wrote in the PowerGUI scripting editor, and I'm going to go ahead and show it here. It's the CPU monitor. I'm actually surprised that the CPU monitor isn't going a little bit hotter while I'm screencasting, but let's just show that it works and make it go a little bit hotter still. I'm going to hop over to this integrated scripting environment, and in one run space I'm going to make it go through a really big set of numbers. And just for extra CPU, I'm going to open another one, and my processor's a champ, what can I say? Here we are, finally at over 60% utilization. So this does a lot of things, and it actually shows a lot of key WPF concepts like data binding, and a lot of key ShowUI concepts like automatic variables and PowerShell data sources. It's a really great end-to-end example to understand how to build a little widget in ShowUI, but it's not a full control yet. We can package that into a function to make it a full control, but that's going to be a topic for another screencast. For this one, we're just going to walk through how it works. So, to begin with, you have a grid, and grid is one of several controls that you find in ShowUI that allow you to basically arrange several other controls. There's uniform grid, stack panel, canvas, and dock panel are the big ones to know about. And this grid actually is named showCPU, which will define an automatic variable $showCPU. And it also has a control name, show-cpu. Control names tend to conform more to commandlet names, but they're basically used as an anchor. They're a way to scope the information that you keep in a UI to a particular named thing. So show CPU, I know everything related to under that thing will have the same access to the same variables. And if I have another control sitting elsewhere in my UI, that's not going to interfere with it. And then it has a data context, and data context is something built into any WPF control. And what it is it's the thing that data will bind to. It's basically an object, any object, that can provide an update that will then be used to determine how automatic things like data binding work in WPF. It's a kind of complicated thing to get, but you don't need to know tons of it. You just need to know this little sucker here. Get PowerShell data source. Get PowerShell data source is a command that will actually create a little embedded script and pop that in a way WPF can make sense of. So what comes out of PowerShell from get PowerShell data source is going to be easily bindable. And what we're really wrapping up in this is this simple one line of PowerShell. Get counter, processor total, percent processor time, dash continuous. As long as that thing is running, which with dash continuous is forever, it's going to be producing another little piece of data. Unfortunately, there's no really great way to know that that data exists or is actually updated, at least in a way that makes it easy to get to the other controls. So there's a fun little hack that's sitting right here. Inside of this grid is yet another grid, and this grid binds its data context to a path called last output. So I'm going to go ahead and run get PowerShell data source over in this ISE here and assign it into a variable so you know what I'm talking about here. It would help if I imported ShowUI. So when I look at this source, there's this output collection which has everything that's ever outputted, and last output, which just has the last thing. And by using last output, it's really easy to make things that bind to output in PowerShell. So it's basically popping out the same output you'd see from get counter in a way that WPF can tackle. Now, since Data context is bound to last output. Whenever new stuff comes in, on data context change happens. Whenever any event happens in WPF, and in ShowUI, a number of things happen to make it easier for you. For one thing, any named control is automatically popped into a variable. So down here, we have the contents of this grid, and it has three things. A rectangle, which is going to be our performance color code. A label, which is going to basically be the CPU percentage. And then timestamp. So, every time a new item comes in, this event happens, and these variables automatically get defined to map to these controls. This is a really handy way to reference things that you've written elsewhere in your UI. What this percentage then does is it goes and it picks out counter samples 0 cooked value and assigns it into a variable. So what that is the last percentage value that the CPU had, and if there was a percentage value, just in case it hadn't started up yet or anything, I go ahead and change the CPU label's content, and I round the percentage. And this is a kind of cool advantage over pure data binding in WPF that ShowUI can do. It's very easy to do stuff like data bind sum and provide rounding in another case. Rounding would be very hard to do in pure data binding in WPF, and it's very simple to just handle an event like this. The next thing it's going to do is it's going to put a timestamp string in there. And this actually is also quite handy because what it does is it allows us to have a higher granularity than it would naturally give. Here comes the magic about the color coding. If the percentage was less than or equal to 50, then I'm going to go ahead and make the color code dark green with the foreground Alice blue, just so it's easier to read. You want a high contrast color. Now, I know at this point that it's not less than 50, so I can then confidently say that if it was less than or equal to 75, it's between 50 and 75. And therefore, I'll make it orange, black, and black. And other than that, it's a bad situation. So I'm going to say it's red, black, and black. This grid contains 3 rows and 3 columns, all evenly spaced. You can use the show grid lines command to actually show grids layout while you're experimenting. So let me demonstrate real quick. This is what it would look like bare. So as you can see, basically you have an automatically sizing little chunk that takes up 1/3 of the space. And what we actually want our CPU percentage to do is look a little bit differently. For one, I want the main label to be a lot bigger. I want the timestamp to be in the lower right, and I want the color code to be everywhere. So the way I make the color code everywhere is by using the row span and column span parameters. A new rectangle is a nice little simple command built into WPF and therefore built into ShowUI that will give you a rectangle. New label will give me a simple label, and this one goes in the first row, but it takes all 3 columns. And furthermore, I use a quickly ad hoc defined style here of center control. Center control has a horizontal alignment of center and a vertical alignment of center. So it shows up in the middle row, and it's centered in the middle row. The other thing I have is bottom right control, and this will put a horizontal alignment of right and a vertical alignment of bottom. And what I have here is a little bit that'll actually go ahead and put the timestamp label. And this puts it in the lowest corner of the grid. Doesn't span any columns, so it's going to be smaller than all of its peers to begin with. And it goes ahead and it binds that to the timestamp. Now I can take out this binding and show you the greater granularity, but right now you're seeing the automatic granularity that you get. It's also possible to just show a full date time and take out the data binding entirely. or to otherwise customize the display. I could change the color code or whatever I'd see fit. And being able to do this sort of thing with just a quick tweak of a little bit of interpreted code is a really, really important advantage that ShowUI offers anybody developing any user interface. And that's pretty much it. It's really not that complex of a control, but it does flow together in a way that it can be a little bit of a adaptation for people who aren't used to building UI. You have a lot of independent parts that you have to think of before, like these labels and the rectangles. You have to think about how you want your item laid out, and you have to think about how data is going to flow. Data is going to be everywhere. Data is going to be pushed into a thing that can update the data on a regular basis. And when the data updates, that's when I'm going to do the color code. So here I have a 35-line quick little CPU monitor. Again, the code to write this is smaller than the code to write the build file of a regular C# application. ShowUI allows you to write most user interfaces in a fraction of the code in time, and I hope this helps you understand how you can make powerful user interfaces in a very, very, very short period of time. Thanks.